So I'm going to welcome up our three speakers. Now I'll do it one at a time. As I read your bio, feel free to come up and take just one of these three seats at the end of this row. Our first guest is Michele Wildman. Michele is Executive Vice President at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, where she oversees operations and management of the Economic Development Incentives and Services Unit, which supports the growth of vibrant, diverse, and sustainable communities across Michigan. Michele manages a statewide team which make investments in Michigan businesses and communities and provides technical assistance and programs and includes the State Historic Preservation Office and the Michigan Arts and Culture Council. Michele has over 25 years of experience in the community and economic development and remains active in a variety of local, state, and federal initiatives, including serving as a member of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. Michele holds a Master of Arts degree in economics from Walsh College and a Bachelor of Arts degree in public policy and public administration from Michigan State University. Thanks for joining us, Michele.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Luke Forrest. Luke has dedicated most of his professional career to assisting and advocating on behalf of Michigan's communities. For the past 8 years, he has led a team of staff and consultants that created innovative education and technical assistance programs at the Michigan Municipal League. This team worked in communities large and small, rural and urban, on topics such as placemaking, redevelopment, and environmental sustainability. Today, Luke serves as the Executive Director of the Community Economic Development Association of Michigan. And previously, he worked as a legislative staffer and lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and as the Public Policy Director for Metro Matters, an organization focused on regional collaboration in Metro Detroit. He holds degrees in urban planning and real estate development from the University of Michigan. Luke Forrest, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, our next guest is Amy Hovey, who's the Executive Director of the Michigan State Housing Development Authority. Amy became the Executive Director in January of 2023. History first. Before joining MSHDA, Amy is well known to the Flint community. She worked at the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation and directed special projects in Flint. And most recently, she served as a contractor for the state's Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, sharing her expertise on housing-related matters. She brings a unique perspective as MSHDA Executive Director, having both been a funder and developer of housing, and also draws on her expertise in government, philanthropy, and the private sector. Amy has more than 2 decades of prior experience in finance, government relations, commercial real estate, construction, housing, and neighborhood revitalization. She began her career as a banker and went on to hold the position of Senior Vice President and CEO of the Center for Community Progress in Washington, D.C. As a graduate of Alma College, Amy Hovey received a bachelor's degree in business administration and psychology, and while working full-time, also earned a master's of public administration from the University of Michigan's Rackham Graduate Program. So, Amy Hovey, thank you so much. And then, as you may notice at a Community's First event, there is not a Glenn Wilson in the room. So standing in today for Glenn Wilson is going to be Essence Wilson, our Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder at Community's First. You want that? So what we would like to do to start for each of our speakers here is really just to provide 2 minutes to give you an opportunity to set the table a little bit to discuss policies that you're working on with respect to housing and economic development issues that you think are particularly important. So Michele, I'm happy to start with you if you want to maybe open us up with a couple of things.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so being from the MEDC, I'm gonna start with economic development. A lot of the things that we've been working on lately are around capitalizing on some of the sort of once in a generational opportunities. There's a number of opportunities at the federal level, so like the Federal CHIPS Act and others, and so a lot of the work that we've been doing is making sure that Michigan has the tools, infrastructure, and resources to bring and have the state take advantage of that while it lasts. And then sort of as it's the counterpart, and certainly what you'll hear me reference most today, make the same tools and services and infrastructure to help our communities prepare for those potential investments, making sure that we have things like resources for childcare and housing and public space and all the things that we know that create vibrancy at the local level. The governor's Make It in Michigan strategy around investing in people, places, and projects is something that we are are focused on keenly the economic development. To do it well, you have to be working on all of those things at the same time. And so we have teams that are pursuing various policy initiatives and programs in each of those 3 buckets.
Well, that's good. And I know that we, in our work at Communities First, see this all the time, though, the importance, though, of trying to think holistically about this work, like you're mentioning, investments in public spaces, investments in the kinds of things that make entire communities as compared to, a single economic development project or a single housing development. They all kind of work together. And on sort of on that broader point, Luke, in your own advocacy at CEDAM, I'm wondering some things that you guys are particularly focusing on maybe right now for policy goals and in the near future.
Yeah, and thank you again for having me, and it's a privilege to be in this beautiful space, first time in this specific venue. I've been working on these issues since 2001, and I would say by far in those 22 years, this is the most exciting time in Michigan in the housing and economic development space for a few reasons. We have strong alignment amongst the decision-making bodies at the state level. We have some excellent state agency leaders like Michele and Amy that are really targeting investments, and I think importantly, know how this stuff works. You heard that in Amy's bio, but that might seem obvious to us if we got our start in the grassroots, but quite often the folks making these decisions at the large funding organizations have never really done this before. And that's not true with these 2 next to me, and as well as a lot of the other folks that we have making these decisions now. And then on top of that, you have these budget surpluses that we had the last couple of years, and so we have kind of historic investments in a number of spots. So we're an advocacy network for community champion organizations like Communities First. We have over 300 mostly nonprofit, but some are for-profit, some bank and financial institutions that are members of us. So that's just a little background of where I'm coming from. I'm not a state agency, not a funder necessarily, more of an advocate. Our board, partially led by Essence, who's our vice president on our board, adopted 3 planks. Michiganians has been our top priority this past year. The second is program. Third, economic inclusion, making sure we have more of a level playing field. And then the third is really building capacity of the community-based organizations. We've seen great success already in the first 9 months of this new legislative cycle in all 3 of those areas, but there's much more to do. I would point specifically to is the governor recently announced a new focus around growing Michigan's population. There's a council, kind of blue ribbon panel called Growing Michigan Together. We're participating in that, as well as a number of other organizations. So they're really talking about some big time investments in our places, in our infrastructure, and our talent pipeline to try to have a more optimistic population growth curve all across the state. So that's something I'm very excited about and we're really focusing on.
Well, and I think building on some of the things you're mentioning too about affordable and attainable housing for everybody in our state, Amy, I know there's 10,000 things that the Michigan State Housing Development Authority is working on right now, but maybe just a couple that you might be particularly excited about or that are being invested in.
Yeah, when you said 2 minutes, I'm like, 2 minutes? So I'm going to talk about, we have a lot of policy with the big P issues right now that are super important to us. But I think first, so I can frame, I'm going to talk about MSHDA's policy with a small p, right? So not specific legislative initiatives that we're working on at this minute, but kind of where we are at MSHDA and what we're thinking and what our vision is going forward. And I think a lot of it has to do with the implementation of the statewide housing plan, which was passed last year in response to the fact that the state of Michigan is in a housing crisis. We're about 190,000 units short. And I only have 2 minutes, so I'm not going to go into why we're that short, but if someone asks me the question later, I'll answer it. But we have created these regional housing partnerships to help implement the statewide housing plan. You have one in this region. Community First is one of the co-leads of that initiative. We've asked each region to create a sub-plan of the statewide housing plan because we know that each region's needs, priorities, and values are different. And we're trying a little something new at MSHDA. we're going to use some of our new financing, our new sources of financing, the community development block grant dollars, which is about $30 million, and $50 million in our housing community development fund. We're not asking folks just to plan, but we're asking people to plan so that the government knows how to, rather its resources in responses to what you know you need, rather than just have MSHDA assume we know, create a program and push it out there, and good luck to all of you in applying for it, right? So it's a little bit bumpy at times, probably Essence, because it's something completely new, but we're really excited about that. And so I hope that all of you have taken a look at your draft plan, which was submitted at the end of August, and we'll provide some comment. I mean, it's important for everyone's voices to be heard within that, because housing is touching everyone nowadays, right? It's a big part of economic development. Employers are having a hard time attracting new employees because they can't afford affordable places for them to live. You know, the cost of housing has just got a little bit out of control within our state. We're working hard at MSHDA to bring some additional resources, but we have capacity issues across the state in getting those resources allocated. So we need more and more partners to come to the table. People maybe who aren't typically involved in housing, we need them to now become involved in housing and help us think a little bit more creatively, so we can better address the crisis that we're suffering here.
Well, and a shameless plug on the topic of the statewide housing plan. If you look on your tables in front of you for the Region H Regional Housing Partnership, which where we are all in right now, today at 2:00, there will be a virtual open house. So for those of you who might be interested in providing comments, so that when our region sends Amy's department information about how we want to prioritize housing, there is still time to make sure that your voice is heard in that effort. And we'll probably ask a few more questions about that and talk a little bit more about it. But Essence, if there's anything else that you want to mention on this as well, just maybe 2 minutes about some priority things that you see in the housing and community development space, maybe things that Communities First is working on or organizations you're involved in.
Well, I will first start by saying that I have a deep appreciation for the work that each of these 3 individuals, I'll say 4 individuals, are doing in our community and doing statewide. It's not easy work, and sometimes it's thankless, but it's extremely important, and it does impact everyone. You know, when we first started Communities First, it's been 13 years now. We started with one project, Oak Street Senior Apartments. And one of the things that I want you to notice, I'm sure many of you have driven by the location, are familiar with it, that there is a sea of parking there. And we're serving, taking public transportation or working with, you know, their families or other service providers for transportation. But here we are with, you know, all of these parking spots where we could have had a green space or a walking path or some other amenity that might serve that population, but we have, you know, a lot of parking. And so that's an issue, that's a policy issue, because there was a parking minimum that we were required to meet. And so as we think about development and we think about zoning and we think about things, as an example, the parking minimums, those are things where there's opportunity for change and where we're doing some advocacy work to make sure that we're using the land that is available to us the best that we possibly can, creating amenities, minimizing things that are not necessary, like that tremendous amount of parking. But when we started our work, we had little idea of what it would evolve to. We've now hired Joel as a planning and advocacy manager because we've become aware of so many policy issues that we would like to see addressed on behalf of those that we serve. One of which is source of income discrimination, which allows landlords to discriminate against individuals who have housing vouchers or other sources of income to pay their rent. And so we're, you know, supportive of efforts that are happening on a statewide level to get rid of that so that everyone has access to housing and they're not being discriminated against based on how they're paying for that housing. You know, we started out as a developer, we're building housing, but recognizing very, very quickly that we're not just building housing, we're building community. And there are people who live in the housing developments and we need to be sure that we're serving them well. So as we looked at that sort of landscape, it lended itself to a lot of kind of social services type work and ensuring that people had access to legal services and mental health services and things like that. So we're doing a good bit of advocacy around that and have hired additional staff to support community members in ways beyond just the physical building.
So I think building on that, Amy, I'd like to just follow up a little bit about some of the work of the statewide housing plan, but also I think, we talk a lot about housing development. I think sometimes it'll be folks coming to MSHDA and saying, well, we just need more financing, more funding for this, more money. Essence touched on a few things, whether it's land use or parking minimums, these kind of things that impact housing development from more of a regulatory side. But if you could maybe address a little bit about how MSHDA sees its roles at the statewide level, both from funding housing development and also in supporting making it easier to build. We know things like missing middle housing, or really sees itself in creating more housing abundance, and maybe how you see this statewide housing plan in the long term making that happen, because I know this is the first time ever that we've done a housing plan in Michigan, and our state's almost 200 years old. So.
And to be honest, we're one of the only states in the country to have a statewide housing plan. So it's not that common. We're happy to have one. It provides a great framework to know what we should fund and what we should be advocating for as a state. And so, as I mentioned, it's really important that we hear really what folks' needs are. And we have been very, I would say, aggressive about finding additional resources from the state level. In the past, MSHDA's financing has mostly come from the federal government in the forms of funding for families that are most vulnerable, mostly 80% and below area median income, a lot of housing choice vouchers, which Essence referred to earlier. But we know because of where we are in our state right now, it's creeping up, so more and more folks can't afford housing. Our teachers are a good group that really, as they come into new communities and are out of college, their salaries do not support even them renting a unit. So we have focused a lot more of our new programs that we've received from the state, going up to 120% of area median income. So you mentioned Missing Middle, which is a super cool, flexible program because it is for rental, it's for home ownership, it's new construction, rehab. It really can be anywhere, and it goes up to 120%. And it's a grant program. And not all of our programs are straight grant programs, but they tend to be the easiest to utilize. We did have a big policy win a couple months ago, and that is amending the state's Brownfield Act to allow for housing subsidy to be a tax increment financing activity. And I don't want to get into the details because it's a little, I guess confusing sometimes, detailed to get into it. But what it really does is it allows for a predictable source to underwrite housing, to help bring down the cost of for sale and rental housing across the state. And it's unlimited. Unlimited, really, right? We don't have a limited amount of future tax revenue in which to help finance the housing. And so we are really excited about that new program. We're officially going to be accepted. So we're excited about that program. And one of the interesting things that SPA's like is it requires local approval first. So again, it's in response to what the local communities and governments want to see in their neighborhoods, right? And so the plans first get approved at a local level, then they come to the state level for capture. So that was a big win for our state. We're not done. We're busy advocating for another program that will bring additional subsidy to the state to really focus on the home buyers. In Michigan right now, it costs about $375,000 to build a 1,200 square foot house. Of our 4 million households, only 1 million household can afford a $375,000 house. And I just said we were short 190,000 units. So we need to build, but we need people to be able to afford to purchase those new homes. The home ownership rate in our state is fairly high, which is great, but that's because we have an older population who tend to have bought their homes 30, 40 years ago. Our younger population that is in their 20s and 30s cannot afford to purchase a home at $375,000. We're making home ownership no longer a reality for the majority of our population if we don't create additional resources. So we have a new initiative called the Michigan Home Ownership Reinvestment Act, which will be hitting the legislature in the next week or so. And of course, we'll be reaching out to all of you that if you think that's a good program, your voices matter at the legislature too. And so we hope that you'll join us in supporting that new program.
Well, and I think even locally, when we talk about the impact of things like a brownfield tax capture, and I know Moses Timlin will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that's being used just a block north of here, 2 blocks north of here on 2nd Avenue. As you leave, you can see a 6-unit development being built thanks to things like brownfield tax capture that have helped make things like that possible in places like Flint, where we often people run into a problem where if it costs $375,000 to build a house, but you can only sell it for $200,000, something's got to give at a certain point to make investment possible. So kind of on that point, Michele, I wanted to maybe tie in a bit more this sort of conversation about the role that we see in affordable housing as leading economic development, but also how the MEDC, some new programs that we know have been investing in communities, whether it's been revitalization and placemaking program or other things to try and build these sort of holistic community amenities around, I think, examples, whether it was public housing, when we build lots of housing to respond to supply, but we don't attach it to economic opportunity, it often creates and isolates poverty and perpetuates social issues. So maybe if you could speak to some of the programs that the MEDC has seen increased funding for recently with some of these state surpluses that Luke was mentioning. It's a whole different world than 10 years ago. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well. So first, I'll just expand a little on what you said. It's absolutely connected at the hip to economic development efforts. We have regional staff in place throughout that are on the MEDC staff in all 10 Michigan prosperity regions, really working on the ground with local economic development partners, municipalities, community members, to really be responsive to those opportunities in the community and build what is going to be of most value within that community. I would say in years back, we would see and help cultivate these economic development efforts coming into communities, large projects, large job creation. We are the economic development agency, but really weren't as proactive in that conversation in making sure that there were things like housing and childcare and community amenities to come alongside of it. So a big part of our work has just been putting some extra bandwidth into that effort and making sure that we are convening conversations between developers and businesses, convening conversations between academia and employers, and things of that nature. Some of the programmatic and financial opportunity that has come alongside of that to make that some of those projects and conversations and planning that's happened possible are things you mentioned one of them, the Revitalization and Placemaking Program, or RAP. As you'll hear me refer to it, we've had now 3 rounds funded, are about to make announcements under round 2. There were some great examples here in Flint and in Genesee County. There was an award in the city of Flint with the project. I think one of them is going to be led by Communities First here. Really excited to see that happen. As well as another opportunity in the Grand Blanc area under that same program. And we made awards in all 10 Michigan prosperity regions using that, and it really was reflective of those community priorities. And I'll say community developer, but they really get it and are working to implement a variety of community needs, because we know it's about the housing. It's also making sure that there are places for people to shop. We do a lot of work in food deserts, have funded some grocery stores in urban environments, both here in the city of Flint and elsewhere in the state. there were some great examples, though, in RAP of that work comprehensively. Everything from providing that housing and childcare opportunity and community to public space, right? People, to keep talent in our state, we have to have amenities for them to use. They want trail systems, and they want to be able to have vibrant downtowns, and so that has been a lot of the focus of that RAP program. We also I want to mention the work that we've done with CDFIs, or Community Development Financial Institutions. They're a really important group in this space of community development, bringing resources from the federal level and local level alike to bear in this space. We were fortunate enough to get some dollars in the last budget. Did one round and are going to do another, providing some capital to those CDFIs. They then are able to leverage that to bring additional money from financial lending partners and the federal government alike to leverage that and provide some great work in community, both in housing lending and small business lending. I would say those are the two primary places where we see that having success, and are excited to be launching another round here in October for those CDFIs. And I'll say there's a CDFI that's based right here in Flint, and then some at the state level that are doing some really great work and are an opportunity that community members should look at in trying to bring lending to their projects.
And I would accent that point if you know folks that are struggling to get access to capital to start up small businesses or for developments, or sometimes lending in challenged communities. Community development financial institutions are an excellent resource here in our state, here locally. I believe Metro Community Development does this work here in Flint to try and bring capital to neighborhoods and to businesses and to communities that are not received investment for a long time. But Luke, we've heard, I think, from Amy and Michele about some state programs and some really unique opportunities here to have a lot of alignment with state government and actual resources behind that alignment, right? I think we've all seen policies, in the past where very exciting, well-written policies, and then the legislature didn't have any money to allocate towards it, or didn't allocate any money, so they stayed on a shelf. But I'm wondering sort of what you're hearing from local policy priorities that you briefly mentioned in your introduction, but also things that you guys see as critical to building a state that is, you mentioned population growth, that is sustainable. Because I think we often know that people will often choose where they want to live and then find a job, instead of sometimes people following jobs as places to live. And I know the work of CEDAM really impacts that. So things that you are seeing in local governments and want to see come out of Lansing.
That's a big question. I would say if you're listening to us all talk, you probably already reached your tipping over point of being able to remember all the names of different programs that we've mentioned. And we've only really touched the tip of the iceberg here of the new programs and additional expanded programs that have happened in the last few years. So where I'm really trying to think about in the long run is how do we make this more unified and less confusing, and make sure that we have organizations like yours at the local level everywhere that can keep track of it all and make sure that their communities are accessing it. Because many times it's a rich get richer sort of scenario in this field. The people who have the bandwidth, have the number of staff people, have the expertise to access the programs, do it over and over again, right? And it's a sort of virtuous cycle. You win one grant round, you have a little bit of extra capacity to apply for the next one. And it's not malicious, I don't think, on the part of people that are giving out grant dollars or financing, because they're scoring each project on its own merits. But in the long run, that does create inequities or exacerbate inequities. So that's where the last point on our policy platform that I mentioned about increasing the capacity of community-based organizations is really extremely important. I think the regional housing partnership is one avenue for that. MSHDA has generously found dollars to fund the nonprofit organizations in each region of the state to sort of build that ecosystem. So that's one. If you're in the housing arena, I would encourage people to pay close attention to that. But really in all of these, I think it's the boring kind of drudge work of making sure that we have enough built in on every new program that you can take that administrative cut as if you're a nonprofit organization or a municipality that's running a grant to hire staff, to have staff beyond the scope of that 9 months or 12 months program to come back to the well the next time and make sure to see it through so that it doesn't just we've all fiscal year and it's like, well, have fun, everybody. We did the best we could. So we need to make sure that we have organizations that can see it through to the finish line. So that's one of the focus points. I'm really encouraged, actually, of this Growing Michigan Together Council so far, as they are thinking about that longer-term funding strategy. But also, I think we need to put pressure on our friends at state and federal agencies to, try to have unified application systems, or you can apply once on behalf of a project and you sort of trickle through the system and say, hey, we might have 3 different programs that apply to this. We don't require you as the community to know the alphabet soup of all of the programs, so we can kind of shepherd the way through this. And I know MSHDA is working, for example, on having additional field staff that can help people with that. MEDC already has an excellent community assistance team that can do that for people, but I think we could even use more of that, really kind of translating what all the programs are and helping people access them so that we're investing sustainably.
Well, I want to remind folks too, we've touched on a lot of things. If you have any questions that you want to ask, again, there are note cards in the middle of your table. And my colleagues Keyshawn and Catherine will be coming around here in the next few minutes to pick those up. So you got maybe another minute or two to write down if you have any questions. I know some people submitted them in advance through the online registration. So please get involved and we'll try and answer what we can in the time we have. But Essence, I want to just ask you from the perspective of someone doing real estate development, actually out here every day, what are some of the biggest barriers that you're seeing, or I guess challenges that you're seeing in maybe achieving some of the vision that it sounds like we all share of a Michigan that is growing population, as sustainable communities, is building hundreds of thousands of units of quality housing. What are some of the things that are bumping up? Because clearly we're not there yet. So I'm wondering what some of those barriers that people are running into and trying to achieve some of these shared goals.
So the first thing that I would like to do is, you've heard a lot about the regional housing plan. I do want to acknowledge that we are co-leads with the Genesee County Metropolitan Planning Commission, and Anthony and Sheila are both here. Wave your hand. There you go. All right, so they're the other part of that team, and we've been able to do some great work together. And I want to applaud MSHDA for encouraging that, public-private partnership and allowing us to figure it out in terms of a working relationship that benefits our communities. Barriers. Okay, so the barriers, and Mike Wright, our VP of Real Estate Development, could probably speak to some of these things a little bit better. Those who believe that everyone should have housing, but it should be somewhere over there that is not anywhere near me, because I don't know what kind of people you might be bringing in my neighborhood. And to that, I would say that we believe that housing is a basic human right. We all need somewhere to live, and it should be a quality place. It should be a safe place, and that's something that we endeavor to do for everyone in the community, not just those that are low income, not just for market rate units. It's for everybody. Everybody deserves that. So that's a constant challenge, and that shows up in, community meetings. That shows up when we're trying to get approvals. It shows up when we present the plans for a building. We've had individuals who have come and looked at our housing developments and toured and said, wow, this is absolutely beautiful. And then they find out they don't meet the income requirements because they make too much money, and somehow think that they have, that's a, how can I put this? That's an unfair situation, when for so long they've had the opportunity to go anywhere that they want and rent, and we're providing quality options for individuals at all income levels, because we do have market rate units as well. Historically, financing has been a challenge, and you've heard a lot about the different programs that have come out and the different financial opportunities. And the thing that has allowed us to access those resources is having a pipeline that probably could stretch across this room in terms of different projects that we see a need for, different things that we've had community members share with us are needed and are necessary. And it's housing for seniors, it's housing for those experiencing homelessness, it's for people with disabilities, for market rate units, for homeowners, for respite housing for individuals getting out of the hospital. And I could go on and on and on and on and on. And we have researched these things, we've looked at the policies, we've looked at the opportunities, and because we have that sort of like robust pipeline and knowledge of community needs, when the various programs have become available, we've had projects and development opportunities that aligned with those funding, with those funding sources. Zoning is a challenge, and I spoke to that a bit earlier in terms of how we're able to utilize land and the types of developments that we can do in certain areas. That always is a difficult thing, always a challenge. The other thing I would say is, the availability of good subcontractors, that can meet the requirements and can meet the threshold to be able to work. So the challenge to produce, quality, safe, affordable housing. So the challenges exist. I'm grateful that we are doing our work in a time and season where there are so many good people in roles of leadership who also get it and who understand that everything is not cookie cutter. What works in one city doesn't necessarily work in another city, and allowing kind of that flexibility and the creation of new programs to meet I won't say they're new needs, right? They're just different needs than what we've, as a state, been able to previously fund. So the challenges abound, the opportunities certainly exist. And, again, I'm just really grateful to be in a time and season in doing this work where we can do some creative and innovative things that honestly aren't that creative and innovative. They're just meeting community needs, but being able to actually do it instead of, sitting there going, I wish we could, but we can't because, and I would applaud, the agencies that are represented for making sure that that's able to happen.
So I think building on that, we'll want to bring up the questions we have here.
That's a big stack of questions in his hand.
I apologize in advance for those whose questions we do not get to. We will do our best. But one question that was submitted in advance, and Amy, I think you can probably speak to this, but everybody here, really are the challenges that we see either statewide or even here locally in addressing homelessness. So, right, sitting here in this beautiful venue, we're still just 2 blocks from My Brother's Keeper, 2 blocks from Carriage Town Ministries, not far from Catholic Charities. So we know this is an issue that's facing.
Our country is one of the few developed countries in the world that doesn't view housing as an entitlement, right? We do education and we do health care, but we don't housing, right? The federal government provides so many what we call housing choice vouchers, which are really to help pay the rent for our most vulnerable population, but they limit the amount. Other countries, if you fall below a certain income level, you're automatically entitled to it, just like you are SNAP benefits or Medicaid, but housing, not the case. Very strange, right? But we do get some money from the federal government to address homelessness in the form of housing choice vouchers, as well as funding to support homeless shelters and homeless prevention through continuum of cares throughout the state. And MSHDA does the kind of continuum of care work for about 61 counties. We have to continue to advocate for additional funding, mostly from million, and the city of Lansing received about $2 million in homeless dollars specifically for our youth, which is an interesting population, right? You wouldn't think that there's independent youth that are homeless, but we have close to 400 youth that are homeless in this state at any given time, which is just a shame. So we did get some additional funding for that. That will be continued funding that we'll get for years to come. So we're excited. That is a point, again, where advocacy and voices are important. Squeaky wheel really does get the funding and gets the policy changes that are needed to be made to make lasting and sustainable change.
And so, and building on that, and this is open to anybody to answer, what are kind of some metrics that you use to track progress towards whether we're trying to see, whether it's a legislative agenda or something, one of the questions that came in was just to share metrics or key performance indicator that your organization tracks to measure success and why. That's open really to anybody.
Oh, I have a ton of metrics, but I was just talking, so I'll let you guys go, and then I can.
Yeah, well, I guess certainly, MSHDA and the MEDC sit within LEO at the state level, and certainly they're working. And a metric that Amy and I kind of can both speak to is 75,000 housing units, and that really, we know, and it's been reflected in the conversation here, right? Both Essence and, saying that she's getting people that are coming in needing a good quality place to live that are over income. And so what we know is that a lack of housing units at any price point puts downward pressure on all the units before. If I need a $150,000 house, I can't go up. So I have to go down, right? And so that then takes away supply from low income. And so what we see with the homeless population is those that are most vulnerable and most in need are left with nothing. And so that unit creation, while we're working to bring workforce units online so that people that are these major employers, when they come in to invest, have a place for their workforce that's affordable for those working families. It's a really important indicator for both of our agencies because we know that that downward pressure does exist, and ultimately the most vulnerable are left without.
2 or 3 specific check boxes on our policy agenda, and this has been pretty wild 9 months. We usually lay those out, and you're lucky if you get 1 or 2 done over the 2-year span. We've already been able to check off 7 of the 9 policy agenda, one of which Amy mentioned earlier, sustainable long-term funding for our Housing and Community Development Fund for the first time in Michigan's history. We have, first time ever, we have funding statewide for children's savings accounts, which is a work that's been led by C.S. Mott Foundation nationally, but Michigan had never stepped up at the state level until last year. And then a big one was the expansion of the earned income tax credit to put more money in people's pockets. So I could bore you with the whole list, but that's an example. We're tracking that, and our hope is by next year we get checks on all 9 and we can have a big celebration and invite you all. Another one for us is we're a membership-driven organization, as I mentioned earlier, so I would just put in a little plug there. If anyone would be interested in learning more about joining that membership, that's another metric for us, is how we engage communities across the state, and do we have quality engagement in all regions of the state. So, I'd love to chat with you after. If you're not a member right now or not on our mailing list, we can get you there.
Well, that's everybody get involved with CEDAM. They're wonderful and have a great vice chair. So one thing, we just got a question in of, what are some industry factors that we see causing rises in prices for housing construction costs, and what can be done to combat these surges?
So that's a good question. And I don't want you to think that at MSHDA and MEDC and the state as a whole, we're only looking at additional dollars for subsidy. We are looking at other policy initiatives that will drive down the cost of construction in general. So what is causing that is the shortage in labor. So your basic economics, you got less labor, you pay more for the labor you do have. We have rising interest rates right now. We still continue to have supply chain issues. Kind of thought we were over that. We're not. Some really key components to development, it's called an electrical switch. They're 18 months out, right? So that causes money. Time really does increase the cost of construction. We have land that's more expensive than ever. So there's lots of contributing factors. I'm just going to quickly touch on a couple things I know that we're working on and let you all follow up. One is really looking and pushing at rezoning and ordinances to allow for a more dense housing. Things like, how can the government perhaps guarantee certain types of loan products in the public or in the private sector to drive down the cost of borrowing? because that's one of the things. We have had discussions around bulk purchasing of different types of supplies to get ahead of the supply chain issue. And we have a ton of apprenticeship programs, our workforce development programs going through Leo and Michigan Works to try to build that trades construction industry up on a labor force. So we are looking at it holistically. We don't talk about it a lot because we don't have a lot of great solutions that are being implemented, but it's not being ignored. I think a lot of folks, a lot of smart folks, and I'm not at every table, but I know of the tables that we're really working to try to kind of do a more comprehensive look at driving down the cost of construction.
Amy mentioned a lot of them. I'll just add a little bit around some of the planning piece. The MEDC has had a program called Redevelopment Ready Communities, and really what that is about is creating predictable, transparent processes for anyone from your average citizen who is going to pull a permit to a developer who's planning a major development initiative in a community. And that is about efficiency. We know, as Amy mentioned, I couldn't agree more, time adds money. All of a sudden your supplies have gone up and your line of credit is outstanding longer. And so we've been focused through Redevelopment Ready Communities on taking communities through a series of 6 best practices so that there is that predictability, that transparency, so that developers know exactly what they're getting into before they start, and ultimately leads to a cheaper, more efficient, and better product in the end. There's about 70 communities in Michigan that are certified in that so far.
And we just took a look at the time, and we're approaching the conclusion of our program. There were a number of questions that came in. We were not expecting this many, in all honesty, although we know that this is a important topic. And so we're going to ask kind of a final culminating question that gives an opportunity for for the panelists to share. I would ask if you have just a few minutes, if people have specific questions for you, if they could come up and ask those afterwards, because some of them did have names on them. And it's not because we don't want to get to them and we don't all want the answers, but we want to make sure that folks can get their morning started. In economic development in Michigan in 2050.
Now, I have no vision for 2050, but I am going to give you a vision for where we're headed right now in the next 5 to 10 years, because I have no idea what things are going to look like that far out. But we're looking at helping to have smarter government. We're trying to drive down our processes and the time it takes to get through funding applications and closings at MSHDA. We're trying to go through lean processes. We are right now to really help make sure that our processes make sense and that they're still applicable. Sometimes people are asking for things that were probably required 20 years ago for a really good reason and are not required today. But we still ask for them because no one thought to say we don't need that anymore. So really we're taking a look at how can we be better on the inside? How can we listen more and build capacity on the outside? We're working closely with MEDC, the Department of Health and Human Services, to try to address exactly what Luke brought up as far as how can we be smarter together and make it easier on our end users, the public, to access our programs as efficiently as possible. Continuing to look at sustainable resources. We've been in a great atmosphere for the last 24 months. This year, there is not the surplus in the state budget, so we're really going to have to work smarter in order to be able to keep our production up, and that's some of the ways that we're looking at it at MSHDA.
I'll shoot for 2050. I think Michigan's population will probably triple by then, because we're going to be the place to be for fresh water and beautiful historic cities. But Michele and I were talking about this earlier. Everybody likes to say this, and you have to actually work at it to get there, because I'll tell you what, I've traveled around the Great Lakes region, and every other province and state thinks they're also the climate migration hub. And many of them are doing more about it than we are. So I think that's why I'm excited to really be planning ahead on a growth strategy. That's going to take real mindset change in a lot of communities. We haven't seen population growth, and we have to be able to deal with it proactively in an equitable fashion so that the benefits of that are lifting up all of our fellow Michiganians, and so that we have, can close that racial wealth gap. Hopefully that'll be gone by 2050. The home ownership rate, the racial percentage on home ownership is gone, but that we're gonna have to deal with growth. And I think our communities need to get ahead of it now, even though it's today, has moved from California and Oregon in the last 5 years. And so it's a real thing. I think it's a trickle right now, but it's going to become a torrent in many communities very quickly. So we got to figure out how to build stuff fast and adapt and have, but I always remind people, like Charleston, South Carolina, no one ever says, you know what's a terrible place to visit? Charleston, South Carolina. You've never heard that. They've tripled their population since the late 80s. And they win awards like every year for most beautiful city. And so it can be done in our communities. We in Michigan haven't had much experience with it in our lifetimes.
I'll take 2050 also. By 2050, in addition to seeing Michigan's population grow, I want people to be able to buy fresh food and vegetables in their own neighborhoods. I want there to be good transportation systems, whether that for your family, that means having a place that's easy to charge your electric vehicle or public transportation that's safe, reliable, and gets you where you need to go. I want there to be housing choices that are good in the neighborhoods that people desire to live in, that are both affordable, whether that means fixing up the vacant units that we have so that people can live where they choose to, or if you're a Northwest Michigander, not having to drive 50 miles to find some place that your family can live because there aren't any available units at your price point. I think all those things, along with having vibrant places for people to live, work, and play, because we know that really is the recipe for success around growth. Businesses need talent, and talent needs and wants vibrancy.
I would answer that question by saying it's tough to know what the rest of my day looks like, so I don't know what 2050 looks like. First hope that I have for 2050 is that I would be retired and happy, and that Communities First would be thriving and continuing to do the work that the organization is doing. Whether it's 2050 or if it's 2025, my hope is that everyone who wants to live in Michigan has a place to reside that is in the neighborhood that they want to be in, near amenities that they need, that they have access to transportation, that they have access to fresh and healthy foods. We know that there's many food deserts throughout the state, but particularly here in development really is the baseline for that. If you have a place to live that you want to be in, you have to be able to pay for it, so that economic development and the workforce component is huge. Education is huge. We need quality schools. And so it's not just, housing. And so often, because of the work that we do, we get hyper-focused on that piece, but really it's about building healthy, vibrant communities. And I'm not just saying that because it's in our mission statement, but really, truly, it is about that holistic approach to making sure we're creating those places that people want to live, work, and play. We're doing some of that well, but I'm looking forward to in 2050, everyone in the state of the Michigan who wants to be here, not just feels like they have to be here because this is where they were born, but this is a place that they really want to be, would have access to all of those amenities necessary to have an amazing, amazing life.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists. If we could give them a round of applause.